Today on the BetaFiles, we're going to look at the primetime lineup. What happened to it? Where'd it go? Does it even matter anymore? So it's another observational history. Hopefully this won't be too boring. So there you go. Hang on to your diapers, babies. I'm the barber. This is the BetaFiles. Hey guys, what's going on? So today we're going to look at the primetime lineup, which is this back in the 80s and 90s, well 70s, 80s, and 90s was a big thing. Excuse me. Back in the 80s it became very important, and then in the 90s it became very lucrative, I guess you'd say. Friday nights were Mondays. I'm trying to think. Mondays, Thursdays, and Fridays were always the big nights. And then Saturday and Sundays, you'd get movies, right? So what the primetime lineup basically was the network's best shows that they would put forward. And you would have a hodgepodge of sitcoms and dramas. And typically, the way it worked was between 8 and 10, you would have your sitcoms, your lighter fare, your family dramas, and then from 10 to 11, you'd have your more adult-themed shows. Adult-themed, not pornographic, but adult-themed, as in, you know, by 10 o'clock, the kids are in bed. Now we can watch St. Elmo's, or St. Elsewhere, Hill Street Blues. I'm trying to think of other ones. But typically that's the way it works. Wednesday nights, I remember Thursday nights was big for sitcoms. NBC was a large part of making Thursday night big. Friday nights were always big for sitcoms. You always had like the family lineup. ABC, of course, hit it big in the 80s and 90s, early 90s with the Friday night lineup. We'll talk about all that. And then Monday nights were typically, Monday nights and Tuesday nights you had some sitcoms with some dramas. Wednesday nights were typically family dramas. And then, like I said, Saturday nights and Sunday nights you had movies. The Sunday night movie, I noticed CBS reintroduced the Sunday night movie on CBS here recently during COVID, during the pandemic. Which was, you know, okay, so you're going to show old movies. That's great. Because they were all movies from the 80s and 90s. But they would also show, Monday nights they would show made-for-TV movies sometimes. Saturday nights would be big for made-for-TV movies. And, of course, Sunday nights they would do some Hollywood movies, some made-for-TV movies, depending on what they were feeling like that week. So it was basically every night the networks had something for everybody. And depending on which network you were watching was, of course, depending on the show. Like I said, NBC kind of ruled Thursday night. That's when Cheers was on. That's when Cosby Show was on. Later, Seinfeld and Friends were on Thursday nights. Frasier was on Thursday nights. I'm trying to think any of the other major ones. Wings was on Thursday nights. Then they got bumped to Tuesdays. Tuesday nights on NBC was the big thing that I remember from Tuesday nights on NBC was news radio. I was a big news radio fan. ABC on Friday nights, of course, you're probably more familiar with the Friday night lineup of ABC than you probably realize. But that was typically on Friday nights you had, starting off, when they first set up the Friday night lineup, you had Perfect Strangers, you had Webster, you had Mr. Belvedere. And then later you had Step by Step. That was on ABC Friday nights. And then, of course, the big ones that you know of, Family Matters, Full House. Those were both on Friday nights. Excuse me. And they would run for like 2-hour blocks. They'd have a 2-hour block for these sitcoms. So you get 4 different sitcoms. And then, like I said, from 10 to 11, they'd have some kind of drama. I don't remember. I think 2020 came on Friday nights on ABC after the Friday night sitcom lineup. On NBC on Thursday nights, trying to remember. I know at one point LA Law came on, and then I think Law and Order came on after LA Law ended. But there was another show. ER was on Thursday nights too, I think. Not 100% on that one. So you get the idea. And I mean, they still have their lineups, right? But things have changed dramatically. Oh, and by the way, if you want to know what CBS offered, CBS had Monday night. And it's kind of still true today. Well, it was until Big Bang went off. But for a long time, CBS kind of staked claims in Monday night. That was when you had Murphy Brown, Kate and Allie at one point. Trying to think of all CBS wasn't that good at sitcoms. Now they did have, no, that was ABC. Never mind. So anyway, so you get the idea. So throughout the course of the 80s and 90s, the primetime lineup was solidified. You also had, like, later when Fox joins the fray, you had Beverly Hills 90210 was an 8 o'clock show, and then Melrose came on after that at 9. Party of 5 was an 8 o'clock show. Trying to think. Real World came on. I think Real World came on Saturdays, if I'm not mistaken. Or maybe I'm just thinking of when I caught it. Beavis and Butthead was every night at one point. And they came on at like 9 or 10. And then Eon Flux came on after them. And then later Daria came on after them. So, you know, they all had primetime shows that they would put up against the networks. And of course, The Simpsons were... The interesting thing about Fox was Fox, since all the different major networks, the big three, ABC, NBC, and CBS, all pretty much staked a claim in a specific night, Fox went after Sunday. And so that's when you had The Simpsons and Married with Children. And I'm trying to think of what else. In Living Color, I think I think that was Sunday night, yeah. So they had a bunch of shows on, and 21 Jump Street was on, no, I think that was Monday nights, was when 21 Jump Street came on. Anyway, you get the picture. You get the idea of, and then of course Fox had 90210 and Melrose Place. But anyway, so the idea was you had this block of time from 8 o'clock to 11 o'clock where you tried to get the family. And the idea was, to get the whole family to sit down and watch TV together. And it worked. It had been working since the 50s, during the so-called, golden age of TV. And this is not something new because, remember, this concept was born out of the radio. The big radio shows would be played between 7 and 9 back in the heyday of the radio, where everybody, like the whole family, would gather around at night around the radio and listen to their shows. So this is not a new concept. This is a very old concept. So in the 50s, with the sitcom comes along, and you have, of course, the Honeymooners, which solidifies the sitcom as a valid, viable platform. The networks start really focusing on this block of time, like I said, between 8 and 10, or 8 and 11, where they can show shows, they can, present shows to the audience that would gather the whole family. And of course, into the 60s and 70s, you have a little bit of experimentation, what would and would not go for the audiences. Of course, good example of that would be like the Munsters or the Addams Family or the Flintstones, which were all primetime shows. I mean, we talk about The Simpsons, we talk about South Park. We tend to forget about the Flintstones being the first primetime cartoon ever, and Hanna-Barbera reaching out, trying to get that demographic. And of course, they're combining different tropes that are going to appeal to the kids and the parents, right? The Flintstones was originally not meant to be a children's only show. It was meant to be a family sitcom, much like the Honeymooners have been. I'm sorry if I sound a little stuffy. My allergies are going nuts today. I don't know why. But anyway, it's not the COVID. Don't worry. It's all up here in my sinuses. It's not down in my chest. But that's where COVID starts. No, it doesn't. I'm kidding. I swear to God, don't go and tell people that's where it starts. That's all I need. That's my viral moment, right? This podcaster in North Carolina said that COVID starts in the nose. What an idiot. Let's spend 6 hours talking about it. All right. I'm not bitter. Okay. So by the 80s, they've pretty much got the formula down, the networks, that is. And so, like I said, and I've already run through most of the shows that hit, but the biggest, probably the one that had, the two that had the biggest impact in the 80s. Well, three. We'll say three. There were three that had really big impacts in the 1980s. Cosby Show, massive impact. Here is a upper middle class black family living in New York, and what he's trying to do is instill traditional values to his children who are growing up in a very interesting 1980s. And instead of what we see today with the culture movement, where they're forcefully trying to establish specific subcultures in the public eye, what the Cosby Show did was, it was kind of like, this is our culture, and we're not going to establish it because we're just going to live it. And it was a very unique situation, or not situation, but a very unique presentation of black culture in 1980s America. And like I said, they were upper middle class. So, of course, the criticism is going to be, well, they weren't showing life on the streets. Well, not every black person in the 1980s lived on the streets, right? The Cosby Show was making a very valid statement that not all black families are destitute and poor and on welfare, right? That there are successful, professional black families in this country. And so that was an important moment. The second one that was uber important to the 1980s is Cheers. Not only is Cheers one of the funniest freaking television shows that was ever made. I mean, you can still go back today and watch it, and it's just hilarious. But it's also important because It's the first sitcom that openly addresses addiction, and it does so in a very subtle way, and it does it with this very strong, very new, I don't want to say new age, but a very nuanced way that we hadn't thought about addiction before. So the first thing that up front is Sam, the owner of the bar and the main bartender, is a recovering alcoholic, and he's sober. And he stays sober. I think there's twice that he falls off throughout the run of the show. 2 times that he drinks. But the rest of the time he's sober. Add to that, you have the question of how alcoholism works within American society and how we deal with it in a place where stereotypes of the quote-unquote drunk don't make sense, if that makes sense. Okay, so like you've got a group of guys that sit around the bar every night. The typical thing, right? And all they're doing is drinking to get drunk. They're all just drinking. But what's interesting is you don't have like the Otis from Andy Griffith in there. You know, they never get belligerent. They never get so far blasted that they can't function. And what's interesting is each night somebody has to give Norm a ride home. Norm won't drive home. And it's so subtle. You don't have it in your face like, give me your keys, Norm. There are numerous episodes where they're closing down the bar and it's time for Norm to go, and of course, who's taking Norm home? And so, someone volunteers to take Norm home. So there's this unspoken rule happening. And of course there's all kinds of crazy things that go on in the bar, but because they set themselves up, again, much like the Cosby Show, where it's like, we're not going to establish this culture, we're just going to live the culture, and you're going to figure it out. Cheers kind of does the same thing. They're very successful at it. Here's the culture we're living in. We're not going to establish it. We're not going to define the rules for you. You're going to have to figure it out. And you do. And that's what made those two shows very great, very, very awesome, and very substantial for television. The third I'm going to talk about is Murphy Brown. With Murphy, unlike those two, Murphy sets up, this is the culture we're going to do. And they lay out the rules. And they do it through Murphy. And Murphy Brown, the character, and I know there was the second run, and I watched a couple of episodes, and it just wasn't any good. This reboot that they did, I think it was last year. Unfortunately, it didn't work. It didn't work now because Murphy, there are a million Murphys out there, right? In the mid-1980s, there weren't a million Murphys out there. When she walks into that newsroom, she's got everybody's balls in her hands. I mean, she's a tough broad, and she is going to, and I know I'm going to get in trouble for broad. There's the viral moment. Some idiot in North Carolina's got a podcast, and he called chicks broads. So anyway, let's spend 8 hours talking about it. Get Joy Reid in here. I've just been canceled twice in one podcast. How awesome is that? What was I saying? So anyway, so Murphy, she's a strong girl. She's a strong woman, and she's awesome that way. And what's really fun about Murphy is they take Mary Tyler Moore and they put Mary Tyler Moore in front of the camera. They give Mary Tyler Moore a big house. They give Mary Tyler Moore a lot more power than she had, and they cut her loose. And that's basically Murphy Brown. And it was a fantastic show. And it was another funny one. It was a really funny show. So there's three big ones from the 80s. As far as dramas go, I think the biggest one that comes from the 80s is probably Hill Street Blues, because Hill Street Blues kind of sets the tone for these crime dramas that are going to come in the 90s. And you could argue that St. Elsewhere kind of sets the stage for the hospital dramas that are going to come in the 90s as well. So then you fast forward to the 90s, and what happens during prime time in the 90s is it starts to get edgier. And the reason for that is because all those kids that were watching Cosby Show grew up. I was one of them. And we started to get cynical. And what you see, the two most influential, well, three, we'll go three again. The three most influential TV shows of the 90s, two of them are based on Gen X experiences. Okay, you've got the older Xers and Seinfeld, and this New York, and two of them were set in New York. We'll talk about where the third one's set in a minute. The two of them are set in New York. You have Seinfeld, which appeals to the older Gen Xers, with the ironic situations, the whole idea of a show about nothing, that there's no real plot, that there's no real that they take mundane things in everyday life and they just blow it up, and they make and they make it huge, and they make it problematic, and like the world is ending. And of course the irony flows from that. And then of course the cynicism of the older Gen Xers. And I meant to mention this in the music one. What's interesting about the music that comes out in the 1990s is it's the older Gen Xers making music for the younger Gen Xers. And so you have like this internal mechanism of this one generation where they're producing stuff for themselves. Okay, where you have the older guard making the music and the younger guard that's consuming the music and then practicing what the music is talking about. Okay. And of course that leads to some of the advances that we see socially at the turn of the century. And of course within the past 20 years, really. Can't believe it's been 20 years since Y2K. Anyway, so let's start. So of course Seinfeld. The second one being Friends, and Friends is the exact opposite of Seinfeld. Well, there is a plot. Okay, it's not the exact opposite of Seinfeld, but it's less cynical. The comedy is more slapstick. Well, I mean they've got Kramer on Seinfeld, but you know what I'm saying. I mean it's very. There's a lot of parallels between the two. Friends is just happier. It's just a happier show. And where Seinfeld, the four main characters of Seinfeld, just awful people. The characters of Friends, the six main characters of Friends, are genuinely good, decent people. Who are just trying to figure it out. So you have, for Gen X, you have these two different groups in these shows that kind of represent the Jekyll and Hyde nature of the generation. The two different binaries. The third show that's probably one of the most important shows to come out of the 90s that I want to talk about is Married with Children, which technically starts in the late 80s and crosses into the 90s. And the reason why that show is so important is because never in the history of America have we loved a family that's so degenerate, that is so rotten to the core, but loves and is loyal. The amount of loyalty that they have for each other is insane. It's a wonderful thing, and they kind of made that statement even more so with the finale. But it's that show is just, it's phenomenal, and the things that they go through are just hilarious. So anyway, but and there are other great shows that come out of both the 80s and 90s. These are all primetime shows, and of course the big ones being The Real World. The Real World is huge. Like Jay and I mentioned, the first 4 seasons, that's really The Real World. After season 4, after the London season, that's when, and really during the London season, you start to see it kind of sway over. But when they get to Miami, it's just, forget it. They know what they're doing now. They know what the gig is. The kids there know that this is a big deal, and so of course they hype it. And they excuse me. Gosh, I can't stop yawning. But you get the idea. And of course the Simpsons are huge. South Park, blah blah blah. So what happens then, when we get to the 2000s, we start to get even more risque TV shows. Of course, the biggest one being 2.5 Men. But there are other ones. There are other shows that kind of push the boundaries. NYPD Blue pushes the boundaries in the late 90s and early 2000s. Every so often, there would be a news report about something that NYPD Blue did. So, and then of course you had the X-Files. But, excuse me. But you get into the 2000s and you start to see that primetime's starting to lose in the ratings. The ratings are starting to go down. I think, and at first, I remember seeing a report about this in the late 2000s. And of course, they blamed the internet. And they were right. But I think they weren't 100%. I don't think they understood 100% what the internet was doing. And then you have the advent of YouTube. And really two things happen. Two massive things happen. The advent of YouTube and Netflix putting their content online. Going from a physical distribution to a digital distribution platform. And streaming becomes the thing. And then, of course, Amazon jumps in immediately. And then a few years later, after all that, Hulu comes in. And so, for a few years there, you start to see the beginnings of the unplugging movement, where largely Xers and millennials are unplugging from cable companies and streaming. They're starting to get into the streaming services because you start to get the Rokus and the Google sticks. I can't remember what the Google stick is called. And then, of course, later the Fire TV stick. You're getting all these different options that take and stream things directly from the internet. You don't need cable anymore. And I remember this is one of my personal anecdotes. When my second wife and I split up and I got an apartment over here in Greensboro, I called the cable company and I was trying to explain to the woman all I wanted was internet. She kept trying to give me cable and I'm like, I don't want cable. I just want the internet. And she kept trying to bundle it. And I finally said, woman. I didn't say woman. I said, ma'am. Let's hear, woman. Bake me a pot pie. There's number 3, right? There's the third viral moment. Some idiot in North Carolina's got a podcast and he said women ought to go cook a pie. Let's spend 8 hours talking about it. Call Rachel Maddow. Anyway. Get her in here. And Jennifer Rubin. So I said, ma'am, I don't want cable. I'm going to use the internet to watch my shows. That's why I picked I had the super broadband at that point, whatever it was, whatever the the widest tier was. That way I could have multiple devices going. And at the time, I think I had like 3 devices. I was worried that one of those 3 devices was going to suck all the internet. I had two Rokus, and then of course my computer. Well, 4 if you count my cell phone, but whatever. I wasn't streaming anything on my phone. Well, maybe YouTube videos. I digress. Anyway, so you start to see that in the early 2010s, right? Between 2009 and 2015, you see this massive shift. And of course, you get to today, and today it's almost commonplace, right? A lot of people have completely jumped from cable and, and satellite, and they've gone to internet only so that they can stream. And of course, they're buying services a la carte. And Lauren and I were going to do the text messages last night, but ended up just with the week that we've had, or the past couple weeks, to be honest with you, with the dog, it was just like, no, we just can't get into this. But we were going to talk about subscription services. It was going to tie into this. And it's gotten to the point, originally when I cut the cord, it was, okay, I'm paying for internet, and I'm going to pay for, I think I had 3 services. And those 3 services didn't amount to, with the internet and the 3 services, I still was about $45 under the typical cable bill. And when I say, I'm not talking about basic cable, I'm talking about 120 channels, a few music channels, etc. Like the average cable subscription, not the basic one where you get like 10 channels for $30. I'm talking about so I was still coming in about $45 underneath that, which I was very proud of. But it's gotten to the point now, here we are in 2020, with all of the a la carte things that you buy. You've got the internet, the price of the internet has it went down for a little bit, then went up, and now it's kind of stabilized. But you add the internet plus the services that we have, and we've got Amazon Prime, obviously. I'm big into Amazon. I know that's so bad. I know. I make up for it by not going to Kohl's. That's not true. I go to Kohl's. I make up for it. I don't go to Kmart. I don't know. Kmart's gone, right? Anyway, so we got that, and Amazon, and YouTube TV, which I didn't even talk about those. One of the interesting things that happened with primetime TV, with the decline of primetime TV and the rise of streaming, decline of cable TV and the rise of streaming, is you have all these, I don't even know what you call them, but they're like these TV services like Sling and YouTube TV and DirecTV now. Trying to think of, Hulu's got it now, where you buy the package and you can watch live TV. So you're basically going backwards, right? Of course, we've got YouTube TV, and the reason why we picked YouTube TV is because you get unlimited DVR. In other words, you can tape whatever you want. You can record whatever you want indefinitely, supposedly. I'm sure that's going to change. It's YouTube. So, but we got Amazon, YouTube, Amazon Music, which is, that in itself is just a really bad deal. But it's necessary now, because here's what they do. And I got suckered bad. I'm not afraid to admit that. I got suckered. So they come out with the Echo. And for my sobriety, my wife bought me one. So when I came home from rehab, she got me an Amazon Echo. That was the first one that we had. So it's like 3.5 years old now. And it's in my daughter's room. And I was like, oh, and I loved it. I was so excited. So then we bought a couple of dots. Amazon ran a couple of like fire sales, and we got a couple of dots. Well, the dots kind of sucked. So last Christmas, I waited for, well, no, it wasn't Christmas, last Thanksgiving. For Cyber Monday, of course, they discount everything, right? So I sent the dots back to Amazon because you can trade them. Sent the dots back to Amazon, got a regular Echo, one of the little Echo one of the small Echo shows, one little 5-inch Echo shows, and then they have these Echoes that you can get that don't come with a speaker. It's just the interface, right? And then they have jacks and Bluetooth capability, and I've got that one in here in my office run to my sound bar, so I wouldn't have to pay the full price for an Echo. So we got basically 2.5 Echoes plus the old one. I kept the original Echo, and like I said, it's in my daughter's room, so we've got 4 of them in here. So I thought, okay, cool. And we've got the Prime Music. So what would happen is, and of course, my wife's got it on her phone. I've got it on my phone. So whenever we want to listen to music, we pull up Amazon Music and go. And of course, Amazon Music goes through the Echo. So what would happen is one of us would be home listening to music at the house. The other one would be driving to work or from work, pull up music on our phone and tell her to play something, and we'd bump the one at home off. So it's like, damn it. So on top of that, you don't get the full library, right? So you're getting... So I said, okay, so we got the Amazon Music. I did the lowest price one at first. I'm thinking, okay, I've got it there, and this ties into the whole family thing, I promise, to the whole primetime thing. So I got the lowest price one, and then we were still kicking each other off, so then you have to upgrade to the multi-device one, which is a more expensive one. And still, it's only $15 a month. But you're paying $15 a month, so you can listen to whatever music you want on any device. We could go around and have all 4 Echoes and both phones playing 6 different songs simultaneously. So that's what $15 a month gets you. Like I said, I got suckered. I got suckered bad. And of course, I didn't realize till I was after. It's kind of like the Apple guy, right? The person who buys into Mac and thinks, okay, all I got to do is get an iMac. Well, now I got to go get an iPhone. Well, now I've got to go get this cable. Well, now I've got to get and you end up like, and I got to get an Apple TV, and I got to get the Apple router, and I got to get, and next thing you know, you've spent like, $4,000 on Apple crap, right? So it happens to all of us, right? Such a terrible world. What does that got to do with primetime TV, Brian? I will tell you what it has to do with primetime TV. That's how we got to where we're not watching TV in primetime anymore. What do you mean? Buying an Echo? No. These little services that they've been giving us for the past 10 years have started to add up. And the more we invest in these services, the more we're going away from primetime TV. And so the idea of primetime, the shows are still there. You can still turn on, like if you turn on NBC at 8 o'clock tonight, they're going to have something on. They've still got stuff on primetime. But the primetime block has lost its weight, its cultural weight. It doesn't mean what it used to mean. When we look back at all those shows from the 80s and 90s that I talked about, those shows were important to our culture. Number one, because of the statements they were making. The writers were having a field day making some really incredible statements. And the country was listening because it was family hour. Now we don't have family hour anymore. And I think when we look at, of course, primetime TV is a capitalist thing. It's designed to sell product. It's designed to catch the consumer when the consumer is most vulnerable. But at the same time, there is this side effect that has hurt us because we've lost it. All these little services that have added up have taken us away from being in a family. One of the services that I pay for once a month for like $3.99, $3.99, is free time for my daughter's Kindle. So I pay basically $4 a month so my daughter can disconnect from her family for an hour, because that's what I've got it set up for. You can go in and set the times. But for an hour, she can disconnect from her family. When she decides to do that is up to her. And of course, she always asks me before she does, can I get on my Kindle? And if it's during a time where I don't think it would be prudent for her to get on her Kindle, I'll tell her, no, but you can do it at this time. But basically, what that $3.99 a month does is allow me to program not just a babysitter for my kid, but program a time for my daughter to disconnect from the rest of her family. And when you look at it that way, it's kind of depressing. And the fact that, you know, if you look at going back to the Amazon Music, because we have the plan where we can listen to music on multiple echoes, it frees us up from not having to listen to each other's music, which again kind of separates us a little bit. That's fine every once in a while. It's not fine all the time. But the problem was we were running into that problem of kicking each other off so much that I went ahead and got it. And so that's what we've got now. And we look at, you know, the YouTube TV thing, unlimited DVR. So she's got all her shows that she likes to tape and she likes to watch. And I've got all my shows that I like to tape and I like to watch. And there are a handful of shows in the middle that kind of like crossover that we watch together. And it's, you know, there's no really real set time that we sit down and watch TV together like you would have in the 80s and 90s. And, you know, what's weird is like in the 70s and 80s and the 90s, there was a lot of experts that would come out with research and say that watching too much TV is bad for you. You need to cut back on how much TV you're watching. The family needs to cut back on how much TV they're watching, blah, 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 blah. But now, the one thing that actually kept families doing something together several nights a week is gone. And that is the true tragedy of losing primetime TV and losing the magic that was primetime TV back in the 80s and 90s and 2000s. So I think Big Bang is probably Big Bang. So you're getting to hear my echoes remind me to feed the dogs. Great. It's time to feed the dogs. And the reminder's on each of them. So if you're anywhere in the house, and there goes the Kindle. All right. I forgot my train of thought. You want to do it again one more time? No. All right. Yeah, my son, I think it was last summer, my son said, "Dad, drank Kool-Aid," talking about the Amazon stuff. And I said, "Son, I made the Kool-Aid." Anyway, all right. So that's the tragedy of losing the primetime lineup. And Big Bang. The Big Bang was probably the last big show that had connection, where people would sit down to watch the Big Bang together when it came on. I can't think. I think This Is Us may. I don't even know about This Is Us anymore. I stopped watching it because it was too depressing. The Jack thing was too much. For me personally. But I think looking at the streaming services, because you can sit down and watch an entire show. And that's kind of brought families together a little bit, maybe. When they release a new show and everybody comes into the living room, sits down for 6 hours to watch a show. My wife and I have binged shows for I think the longest we've ever gone is 3 hours straight binging a show before I finally said, I need a break. I can't sit down and binge for hours and hours and hours. For some, after a while it starts to get on me. Now I can watch a couple of episodes, walk away, come back a couple of hours later, and watch a couple more episodes and do it like that. Kind of, I guess you would call that sporadic binging. But weekend binger. But I can't do that. But I think that has kind of taken the place of the primetime experience, but it's still not the same. This idea of having groups of shows that families could gather around the TV and watch together. That's on a scheduled night, so it was a routine. I think the tragedy of losing that is that we've lost a huge component that actually helped families be families, that helped families get to know one another. What jokes did, Bobby laugh at that little Jan didn't laugh at? So that's, so there you go. So there's primetime TV. What happened? Well, the short answer is streaming happened. Netflix happened, right? What was the consequences? Ultimately, the consequences is we lost a very vital part of family relations in America. Something that helped but like I said, helped relationships within families through The Simpsons and Seinfeld and Friends and Murphy Brown and Full House, right? So anyway, all right. So that's it for this show. On Friday, we're going to be looking at the picket fence. We always hear this wonderful, 2-story house picket fence. What is the picket fence? What does it mean? We'll talk a little bit about that. And get you ready for baseball. MLB's coming. Thank God. So we'll talk a little bit about baseball. Not a lot. I won't bore you to death about baseball, but I do have a couple things I want to mention about the upcoming shortened season. Just throw it out there for you. Maybe some of y'all will start watching baseball. There's nothing else to watch, right? All right, make it a great day. As always, oh goodness. As always, the sun comes up. There's opportunities, so make sure you take it. Okay, I'm the barber. This has been the BetaFiles.